I'm going to come back one day, and I'm going to kill you. Yeah, go, go! I hear sirens! Don't stop! Run!
There are crimes that announce themselves. Explosions, screams, the kind of violence so loud and so visible that the whole street turns to look. And then there are crimes like this one, in and out in less than 3 minutes. 3 minutes that destroyed a man's sense of safety so completely that he never walked back through his workplace door again. 3 minutes that stole thousands of pounds of honest wages from people who had earned every penny. 3 minutes that were planned, practiced, and executed with the cold efficiency of people who had done this before and fully intended to do it again. 3 minutes that would have been the perfect crime, if it weren't for one thing. One small, almost laughably ordinary thing. A cap. That image sat on a detective's screen for the length of one held breath. And then DC Shabnam Chowdhury leaned forward and everything changed. For hours northeast of Findon Valley, in the loud, churning, relentlessly busy streets of Tower Hamlets in East London, DC Shabnam Chowdhury was having what she had hoped would be a routine end to a long day. She had already been on shift for hours. The Tower Hamlets Criminal Investigation Department was not a posting for people who valued quiet evenings and predictable working hours. It was a team that operated in one of the most densely populated, economically complex, and criminally active boroughs in the whole of England. Every day brought new cases, new urgencies, new human beings in states of crisis and desperation and sometimes danger. Shabnam had seen most of it in her more than 30 years of policing. She was not easily surprised, but the call that came through from the custody suite as she was preparing to go off shift was one that would consume the next phase of her career with an intensity she hadn't anticipated. There was a suspect in custody for a robbery. The case, the custody sergeant assured her, was reasonably straightforward. A getaway car had been spotted leaving the scene. Officers had stopped it 20 minutes later. The driver, a man named William Boyce, was now in a cell. It should be quick. Get the witness statements, charge him, go home. Shabnam Chowdhury was about to discover just how wrong that assessment was. Backchurch Lane in Tower Hamlets is not a glamorous address. It is a working street, logistics firms, light industrial units, the kind of businesses that keep a city running without ever appearing in its promotional materials. The garage on that street was exactly what it appeared to be, a small family-run operation where ordinary people brought their ordinary cars to be fixed by people who knew what they were doing. On the day in question, 2 members of staff had made a routine trip to the bank to collect the weekly wages, cash, as many small businesses still operated at the time. They drove back to the garage, pulled into the forecourt, and walked into the reception carrying the wage bag. It was, by any measure, an ordinary Tuesday afternoon transaction. What happened next was anything but ordinary. 2 men entered the reception almost immediately behind them. What followed was violent and terrifying. One of the garage employees was attacked without warning, kicked, punched, assaulted with the kind of force that suggested these men had come prepared and had no intention of being gentle about it. He clutched the wage bag with both hands, instinct and desperation driving him to hold on even as the blows rained down. The manager, seeing what was happening through the forecourt window, came running. The second attacker grabbed the wage bag and ran. The 2 men sprinted from the garage, threw themselves into a waiting car, and were gone before anyone could do anything to stop them. Thousands of pounds in cash wages, gone in less than 3 minutes. One member of staff was so traumatized by the assault that he never returned to work. Not the next week, not ever. The garage, which had been simply a place where people earned an honest living, had become a site of violence and violation. The casual cruelty of the attack, the willingness to hurt people who were simply doing their jobs, was the kind of thing that Shabnam Chowdhury, with all her decades of experience, still found difficult to accept without a deep personal anger.
What that does for me is make me far more determined to go out and solve crime, to catch the bad guys, so that those victims can have some justice.
William Boyce sat in the custody suite with the particular stillness of a man who has been here before and knows how to play the game. He was not panicking. He was not agitated. He was, in the assessment of the officers who had brought him in, entirely too calm. He had been stopped 20 minutes after the robbery, driving the vehicle that witnesses had identified as the getaway car. It was, on paper, a strong arrest. The car matched the description. The timing was right. The route he had been driving was consistent with leaving the scene. But as Shabnam sat down to begin piecing together her case, the first problem emerged almost immediately. The witnesses who had been inside the garage during the robbery, the manager, the staff members who had been attacked, gave descriptions of the two men who had physically entered the reception. The descriptions did not match William Boyce. He was simply not the right build, the right height, the right physical type to be either of the two attackers. The men who had beaten the employee and stolen the wages were not him. This was not in itself exculpatory. Getaway drivers in organized robberies rarely enter the premises. Their job is to wait outside, engine running, invisible and anonymous, ready to move the moment their associates emerge. Boyce, if he was the driver, would never have been inside that garage. But it meant that no one at the scene had seen his face. No one could place him there. She had a car and a driver and almost nothing else. The forensic search of the vehicle turned up nothing that directly connected Boyce to the robbery. No stolen cash, no obvious weapons, a handful of items scattered around the interior, and almost as an afterthought, a couple of baseball caps stuffed behind the seats. Shabnam noted them, logged them, didn't yet know what to make of them. The team seized everything and moved on. Then she sat down with Boyce. William Boyce was absolutely adamant. He had not been anywhere near Backchurch Lane on the day of the robbery. He had been at his girlfriend's house. All day, she would confirm it. He had witnesses, alibis, explanations for everything. His manner was composed, his story consistent, his tone carrying the particular edge of a man who believes he is untouchable. It sowed doubt. That was, Shabnam recognized precisely its intention. Even for a detective as experienced as her, even with her gut screaming that this was the driver, that this man had sat outside that garage while his associates beat an innocent man unconscious. Doubt is doubt. The legal system does not run on instinct. It runs on evidence. She had 24 hours under the rules governing how long a suspect can be held without charge in the United Kingdom. The clock was running. By the end of those 24 hours, she either charged Boyce with solid evidence or she let him walk free. Then, as the interview concluded and they stepped out of the room, Boyce turned to her. What he said next was not the kind of thing that gets forgotten.
I'm going to come back one day, and I'm going to kill you.
He said it quietly, almost conversationally, as if it were a simple statement of fact rather than a threat. Shabnam felt the shock of it register on her face before she could control her expression. She saw him see it. 31 years in policing. Never in all that time had a suspect said anything like that to her as he walked out of an interview room. But the shock quickly became something else. Because a man who says something like that is not a man who is confused or frightened or innocent. A man who says something like that is a man who is furious at being caught and utterly certain of his own power. Shabnam Chowdhury was not a woman who responded well to being told what to do. She went back to work. The girlfriend was her next hope. Alibis provided by romantic partners are among the most unreliable in criminal investigations, not because partners are inherently dishonest, but because love and loyalty have a way of reshaping memory in convenient directions. Shabnam had seen it dozens of times. She would go to the girlfriend, find the cracks in the story, expose the inconsistency, and watch the alibi collapse. It did happen that way. The girlfriend was credible. Her account was detailed and consistent. She spoke calmly, without the overemphasis and careful vagueness that usually characterize a manufactured alibi. She provided time, specifics, the kind of incidental detail that suggests genuine recall rather than scripted testimony. There was, Shabnam had to admit, no obvious reason to disbelieve her. She had hit a brick wall. Her suspect was in custody. Her evidence was circumstantial at best, and the clock was still running. Then she dug deeper into Boyce's background and found something that electrified the investigation. William Boyce had been released from prison exactly 4 days before the robbery. For days, he had been serving time for similar offenses, robberies, violent theft, the kind of organized, opportunistic crime that requires specific knowledge and specific associates. He had walked out of prison on a Friday, and by the following Tuesday, A garage in Tower Hamlets had been hit by a crew that moved with professional efficiency. This was not a coincidence. This was a man who had returned to exactly what he knew. And Shabnam now had the circumstantial foundation she needed to have him charged and remanded while she continued building her case. A judge agreed. Boyce went back into custody. The real investigation was just beginning. Shabnam Chowdhury was, by her own description, a dog with a bone. It was not a quality she had cultivated artificially. It was simply the way she was built. When a case wasn't closed, it lived with her. It followed her home, sat with her at breakfast, occupied the quiet spaces between tasks. She didn't let cases go. Cases let go of her eventually when the truth had been found. She went back to the beginning, not to the garage. There was nothing left to find there. Back to the very beginning of the sequence of events. She pulled up the timeline of the 999 call and the arrest, laying it out with precise timestamps. Boyce's girlfriend claimed he had been at her house. For that to be true, she calculated Boyce would have had to travel from the girlfriend's address to the location where he was stopped by officers, a route that didn't pass anywhere near Back Church Lane. She ran the journey times. She ran them again. The numbers didn't work. Given the time of the 999 call reporting the robbery and the time of Boyce's arrest 20 minutes later, there was simply no route from the girlfriend's house to that stopping point that was compatible with his timeline. The only route that worked, the only journey that explained both the timing and the location, was one that went directly from Back Church Lane. The alibi was geometrically impossible. But proving something is logistically unlikely is not the same as placing someone at the scene. Shabnam needed more. She needed him at that garage. She needed evidence that Boyce or someone connected to him had been watching the garage workers before the robbery. Casing the target, learning the routine, identifying the moment when the wages would be brought back from the bank. There was no CCTV at the garage premises. The forecourt, the reception, the street outside, none of it was captured on camera. She had no footage of the robbery itself, no images of the attackers, nothing that placed the getaway car on the forecourt at the critical moment. So she went to the bank. The logic was simple if the execution was painstaking. The garage workers had collected the wages from a specific bank branch and driven directly back to the forecourt. If the robbers had known exactly when the wages would arrive, if they had been waiting in the right place at the right moment with the kind of preparation that suggested advanced knowledge of the routine, they had to have followed the workers from somewhere. And the most likely somewhere was the bank. Shabnam obtained the CCTV footage from the bank for the relevant time window. The footage was busy, a working branch on a weekday afternoon, customers coming, going, staff moving in and out of frame, the constant, ordinary traffic of people handling money. She sat down and began to go through it, frame by frame, customer by customer, face by face. It was a kind of work that requires a particular quality of attention, not the sharp focus of crisis, but the slow, patient, almost meditative concentration of someone searching for something they can't fully describe. She was looking for anything that felt wrong. Any face that appeared at the wrong moment, lingered too long, showed too much interest in the garage workers or too calculated a lack of interest. And then, right in the very corner of the frame, almost at the edge of the shot, she saw him. A man partially obscured on the periphery of the bank's field of vision. He was wearing a cap, not just any cap, a baseball cap of a very specific, very distinctive bright yellow. The kind of yellow that catches the eye involuntarily. The kind of yellow that you notice even when the person wearing it doesn't want to be noticed. Shabnam Chowdhury froze the frame. She leaned closer to the screen. She had seen that cap before.
I was pretty sure that I'd seen that baseball cap somewhere else.
She went back to the evidence log from the forensic search of the getaway car. The items retrieved, the miscellaneous objects seized and bagged and cataloged in that flat, bureaucratic language of police procedure. And there, among the other items, was a baseball cap, bright yellow, the same distinctive shade, the same style, the same proportions, the same specific piece of clothing. The cap that had been in the getaway car was the same cap that was visible in the bank footage on the head of a man watching the garage workers collect their wages. Shabnam had her evidence. She had her proof. What the yellow cap established, with an elegance that almost disguised its devastating implications, was the complete operational picture of the robbery. Someone connected to Boyce's group had been at that bank, watching, tracking the routine. They had followed the workers back to the garage. They had coordinated the attack with the getaway driver already in position. The whole operation had been planned, surveilled, and executed with professional precision by people who knew exactly what they were doing. And William Boyce, for days out of prison for similar crimes, had been the driver at the center of it. The man who had threatened to kill a detective on his way out of an interview room. The man whose girlfriend had tried to give him an alibi. The man who had apparently believed himself untraceable, unidentifiable, invisible, precisely because he had never gone inside the garage, never shown his face to any witness who could pick him out of a lineup. What he hadn't counted on was Shabnam Chowdhury's refusal to stop looking. What he hadn't counted on was a detective who understood that the evidence exists even when you can't immediately see it, that the truth leaves traces in every direction, and that patience, combined with the right angle of vision, will eventually find them. The bright yellow cap that had seemed in the first hours of the investigation like just another piece of meaningless detritus in a suspect's car became the pivot on which the entire case turned. It connected the pre-robbery surveillance to the getaway. It destroyed the fiction that Boyce had no knowledge of or connection to the crime. And it did so with a kind of simple, visual, undeniable clarity that leaves very little room for argument. William Boyce was charged with robbery and violent assault. He was convicted. He was sentenced to 4 years in prison. The garage worker who had never come back to work after the attack received, at least, the knowledge that the man responsible had been held accountable. That justice, imperfect and delayed as it always is, had eventually been done. And Shabnam Chowdhury, 31 years into a career that had tested her in more ways than she could count, added one more case to the long, quiet list of things she was glad she had not walked away from.